Hello everyone, I'm Ankit and you're watching StudyIQ IAS English. In our today's video, we'll talk about why our countries like Iran on one hand and US and Israel on another are at war with each other. Now, at the dawn of 28th of February, the explosions were heard around many different regions across Tehran district, and they were very close to the offices of the Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Now, it was the Israel who dealt the first blow in active cooperation with US, and now Israel has declared a state of emergency, and they have braced themselves for retaliation from the Iranian side. Now, it was US who has provided logistical and material support to Israel, and this is declared as a preemptive strike on Iran. Now, in our today's video, we'll divide the discussions into multiple halves. First, we'll discuss what is the trigger point for this war and were there any efforts made in order to cool down the tensions. So, we'll also try to understand what were the demands of both of the sides in order to not fight the war and why this did not materialize. Similarly, we'll also try to understand whenever any country goes to war, it has certain kind of objectives in mind. So, what are the war objectives for Iran and US for that matter? And we'll also try to understand what will be the consequence of this war, not on just this region, but across the world economy, and for that matter, India also. So, we'll try to divide our discussion into multiple different segments. Let us start with the first segment, but before that, if you want to download the notes, you should, because these are important from your exams perspective. You can go to this particular Telegram channel called as ATS Live and download them. And while you're at it, please do not forget to subscribe to the channel also. So let us first understand what is the reason for the conflict between Iran and US. And the reason is Iran's nuclear program. Now, for a long period of time, it was US who did not wanted the Iran to have a nuclear program. And to force Iran, in order to back down, US imposed what is called as a maximum pressure policy. Under maximum pressure policy, US imposed severe economic sanctions on Iran in order to cripple its economy so that Iran does not have any option but to come to a negotiating table. Now, on other hand, Iran has maintained that it is always open to the negotiation, but provided it is the US who should lift the sanctions first. Now, when these negotiations were happening, the negotiations were made more complex by a demand that was raised by an ally of US called as Israel. Now, Israel was of the opinion that while you're signing a nuclear deal with Iran, why don't you force Iran also to limit the range of its ballistic missiles? Now, Iran considers this demand of Israel as a red line, so Iran did not agree to this demand. Okay, so what did we understand? The trigger point for this conflict is Iran's nuclear program. It is not that US earlier has not tried to curb the Iran's nuclear program. In 2015, if you can recall, it was Iran who agreed to sign a nuclear deal with countries like US, other permanent members of the United Nations Security Council, and also another important global power, that is Germany. This deal was called as Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. Under this nuclear deal, Iran agreed to limit its sensitive nuclear activities, and in return, it offered inspections to be done of its nuclear facilities by international inspectors belonging to the International Atomic Energy Agency. And the benefit that Iran got out of this deal was that US and Western countries would lift the economic sanctions they have imposed on Iran earlier. Now, let us understand this deal in a bit more detail. Now, to make nuclear weapons, you need to enrich uranium because the naturally available uranium is not what you can call a fissile material. So, to take out the fissile material like uranium 235 or uranium 238 out of the natural uranium, that uranium needs to go through a process which is called as enrichment. So, for weapons grade uranium, you need more than 90% enriched uranium. But to generate power out of that uranium, you only need about 3 to 5% of enriched uranium. So, Iran agreed under this JCPOA agreement to enrich uranium up to 3.67%, and the stockpile that it will maintain of this much level enriched uranium would be worth 300 kilograms. Now, this was enough for Iran to generate nuclear power out of this enriched uranium, but it was not enough for Iran to make nuclear weapons out of this agreed level of nuclear enrichment. Now, in exchange, US offered that they will lift most of the economic sanctions that they have imposed on Iran. So, you'd think in 2015, this situation reached a stalemate where both countries agreed that they will lift the economic sanction and Iran would limit its nuclear program. But things went south when Trump was elected to the office of United States President for the first time. In 2018, Trump pulled out of this JCPOA agreement and again implemented those crippling economic sanctions on Iran. And to your surprise, even after the successor of Trump, who was Joe Biden, when he became the president, he did not lift those economic sanctions. So the relations between Iran and US soured because of the decision of US to pull out of this agreement, which all the major powers and Iran signed in the first place. Now, to create pressures on what you can call US, what Iran did, that it started to enrich more and more uranium. It started to increase the level of enrichment, and it also increased the amount of enriched uranium that it stored. Now, it was IAEA which in May 2025 reported that Iran had stockpiled more than 400 kilograms of highly enriched uranium. What do I mean by highly enriched uranium? This is enriched uranium worth 60%. Now, at 60% enriched uranium, you need to understand Iran was much closer to a weapons grade uranium, which requires over 90% of enrichment than it was before when it had signed JCPOA, because it only agreed Iran to let enriched uranium up to 3.67%. So, no non-nuclear weapon state presently is known to keep such highly enriched uranium. And why did Iran did that? Iran did in order to pressurize US in order to become the part of JCPOA. Now, this was when the situation between US and Iran went very south. Now, it was not that both of the countries did not wanted to discuss this matter diplomatically. Both of these countries had multiple rounds of talk. And in these multiple rounds of talk, US wanted Iran to abandon all its aspects of its nuclear program and also agree that it will not build nuclear weapons, it will not enrich any uranium at all. Forget about that 3.67% enrichment also. Iran will not be allowed to do that. And Iran, in case if it possesses any enriched uranium, it should hand over those enriched uranium and will not produce any more in the future. So this was an absolute demand from the US side that Iran should agree to not continue nuclear weapon program at all, and it should give up any enriched uranium that it has in its stockpile. Now, on the other hand, it was Iran who argued that its nuclear program was civilian in nature. Iran, like US, was a signatory to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which gives any signatory of NPT the right to use the nuclear power for its peaceful purposes. Peaceful purposes means health, power generation, etc. So Iran felt that it is its inherent right to generate nuclear power, which has become non-negotiable, and it was US which was denying them this very right in the first place by signing this crippling deal. So that is why this situation reached a stalemate. Both of these countries had very entrenched position on the negotiation, and that is why these negotiations did not lead to the cooling down of tensions. And as a result, what we see, the declaration of war has happened. So now that the declaration of war has happened, let us understand what is the objective or what is the end result countries like US and Israel want in the first place. US's priority, which has been highlighted multiple times by its president Donald Trump, is that they want a regime change in Iran. Now, Iran's leadership on one hand, which is led by Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, has been repressive. There is no doubt about that. They have multiple times, they have crushed the protest, they have tried to curb down the dissent, and many Iranians themselves have risked their lives in order to protest against the regime. But you need to understand, howsoever brutal the Iranian regime it is a matter between Iranian people and the Iranian government. Any external actor like US, like Israel, they do not have any moral right to create an attack on a sovereign country. So this first war objective is actually an objective by US, which inherently is wrong morally. Similarly, what you need to understand, the second objective that US wants to achieve out of this war is for Iran to give up its nuclear program. And US has argued that if nuclear weapons would come in hands of Iran, it would make the region of Middle East, which is already very unstable, more unstable. So it will create a destabilizing impact on the region of Middle East. Now you need to understand, for that matter, even this argument of Western countries are morally wrong. Why it is morally wrong? Because nuclear weapons are catastrophic. There is no doubt about that. But they are catastrophic everywhere, right? It is US and Israel who already have a nuclear weapon. So why Iran is making a nuclear weapon? Because it wants to establish a deterrence in the region. So deterrence cannot be a privilege of a few countries. Deterrence should be achieved, if it is to be achieved at all, and every country has a moral right to achieve the deterrence. So what we understand from this objective, that in reality only some states would want to possess this ultimate weapon of nuclear weapons, and other countries like Iran may be bombed in order to prevent them from becoming a nuclear weapon state. So these are the two objectives which we have established is a morally wrong objective. Now let us understand what would be the consequence of this war. First consequence of any war is the human cost. Now escalation, whenever it has happened from the Israeli and the American side, and the retaliation to this escalation is inevitable. And as we have seen, by the time I was recording this video, the Iran for that matter, has attacked places like Abu Dhabi, it has attacked places like Bahrain and Kuwait, which is targeting multiple US bases. Now, civilian casualties in this case is almost inevitable, and you need to understand it is Iran who possesses one of the largest regional arsenals of drones as well as of missiles, and it has demonstrated its capacity in the past by launching hundreds of projectiles in the direction of Israel. Now, also, for that matter, you need to understand US has many important bases in the region, including its largest base in Qatar, which is known as Al Udeid base. Now, Israel, for that matter, and Iran can also use its proxy in order to continue this war. So for that matter, Hezbollah and other regional militias could be activated, and this could transform this regional conflict into a full-fledged world war, right? So this is the first cost, that is the human cost. Second cost is obviously geography and economy, and this is where the location of Iran becomes very important, because Iran is located north of what is an important region called as Strait of Hormuz. Now, Strait of Hormuz is very important as far as global trade in fossil fuels is concerned, and it is very close to the region where the conflict is happening. Now, any serious conflict in and around the Strait of Hormuz has a potential to disrupt global shipping, which would send global prices of crude oil, or it would skyrocket the global prices of crude oil, which would trigger inflationary shocks not just in this region but across the globe. Now, when energy prices like the prices of crude oil rise, it leads to increase in transportation cost and ultimately creates inflation everywhere. To deal with this inflation, central banks across the world would increase the interest rate, and this would put a negative pressure on the global economic growth. So there is a chance, if this war prolongs, there would be a risk of recession globally. Now, the next consequence is for India. You need to understand India is a net importer of crude oil. So much so that last year, India imported as much as 88% of its crude oil requirement. India, being world's third largest oil consumer, relies on key markets of Middle East to source its crude oil. 40% of India's total crude oil, you need to understand, they come from where? They come from Strait of Hormuz. And if this war continues, first of all, the prices of crude oil will rise, which will lead to what is called as imported inflation in India. Similarly, what you need to understand, whenever the price of crude oil rises by $1, it increases India's import bill annually by how much? By $2 billion. So this will create a negative impact on India's current account deficit. It will enlarge. When India's current account deficit would enlarge, its import costs will increase, and this would put a downward pressure on Indian rupee, which means Indian rupee would depreciate. Now, another consequence is how long this war would continue. Now, to fight this war, there are multiple ways to fight this war. One common and the more conventional way to fight a war is to send your army into the country. That is called as boots on ground strategy. Now, on US's part, this strategy is highly unlikely to happen, because first of all, this kind of intervention directly in form of sending military creates risks of your military's death, and this is unacceptable to the core vote bank who gives vote to the Republican Party as well as Donald Trump, called as Make America Great Again voter base. So this is not likely to happen. So what is going to happen is a small scale, very predicted attack on important infrastructure in the region, especially by doing bombardment to deal with or to threaten the regime and its sanctity. Now, this regime, first of all, the regime which is led by Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, has been already weakened because of decades-long economic sanctions that have been imposed by the West, and many Western countries think that bombing is an end result, that it would cripple the regime and it would lead to establishment of a new democratic regime. But you need to understand, this kind of a strategy in the past has failed in Middle East. What US did, it bombed the living daylights in Iraq, and this created the removal of Saddam Hussein, but it did not yield a democratic shift in the Iraqi society. It yielded, or it resulted into deep insurgency, sectarian war, and it led to years of instability. And same thing even continued in Syria. Syria, which was already under civil war, external bombardment fragmented the situation rather than solving it. And in both these countries, because of the consequences of a long conflict, it led to emergence of an even radical organization known as ISIS. Right? Similarly, what happened in Afghanistan? In Afghanistan, 2 decades worth of intervention by America in order to establish a puppet democratic government did not yield results, and ultimately when US withdrew from Afghanistan, who came back into power? It was Taliban who came into power. So what does history tell us? History tells us that pure bombardment done in any country without any active boots on ground strategy results into instability, and this instability might also happen in Iran because US is not learning from the history. Similarly, what you have to understand that the regime which is currently in place in Iran is a regime which depends on authoritarianism, and this Iran's nuclear and missile facilities have been dispersed and it has been hardened because many of these facilities are remained meters underground. Now, even if US does aerial bombardment in Iran, it might partially damage and it may delay even the end result of the Iranian nuclear program. But if there is also a chance, there is a chance that it can accelerate the nuclear program of Iran in order to establish the deterrence between the parties. Now, historical precedents or historical understanding, it suggests us that any external attack, it basically does not threaten the hardline regime, it strengthens the hardline regime, because whenever any conflict happens, it allows the hardline regime to consolidate the nationalist sentiment, and this is where more of the moderate vices or more of the moderate opinions in the society are curbed. So this is what is more likely to happen because of this instability which the America and Israelis are the result for. Now, before we move into the question which might be asked in the UPSC exam, there is a very important announcement. Right now, we are starting with a holy sale. In this holy sale, you are going to get discounts on all the courses. Please understand, for 2027 and 2028, if you're really serious about your UPSC attempt, you should consider taking admissions in our foundation batches. And in holy, you'll get up to 55% off. So this is flat 55% off, which is offered only during the Holi. So please utilize this opportunity, get the admission at the earliest possible date. And this is the kind of question that can be asked in the exam. Consider the following countries. Which one of these countries share a direct coastline with the Strait of Hormuz? We have already covered Strait of Hormuz. I even showed you the map, so you can go and refer to the map and let me know the correct answers in the comment section. Okay. Also, what do you feel about this war? Is US and Israel morally justified to attack a sovereign country? And is this a morally justified option in order to deny Iran from getting a nuclear weapon? Please do let me know your opinion in the comment section. I am waiting for it. And to download the notes, you can go to this particular Telegram channel, which is called as ATS Live. Okay. So this is all from my side for today. Please have a very good day. We'll see each other again quite soon.